The parking lot buzzed with the mundane energy of a suburban afternoon. Shoppers moved between cars and stores, the air filled with snippets of conversation and the hum of engines. Among the usual bustle, a striking figure emerged, a well-dressed black woman stepping out of her sleek car, her presence commanding attention. Her tailored blue suit and poised demeanor spoke volumes about her confidence and professionalism. In her hand, she carried a leather folder brimming with legal documents, each one a testament to her hard work and dedication to justice. As she closed her car door and adjusted her bag, her mind was focused on the tasks ahead. Meetings, calls, and the never-ending responsibilities of her high-ranking legal role. She had no time for distractions, much less the undercurrent of judgment. She had grown accustomed to navigating in spaces where she wasn't always welcomed. Across the parking lot, a police cruiser idled. Behind the wheel sat a white officer, his gaze narrowing as it settled on the woman. He took in the scene with a critical eye, his assumptions shaping a narrative before he even stepped out of his vehicle. To him, her presence in this upscale setting felt incongruous, suspicious even. A well-dressed black woman with a high-end car. It didn't add up in his mind. As she walked toward the entrance of a nearby building, the officer decided to act. His patrol car rolled forward, lights flashing momentarily to catch her attention. He exited the vehicle with calculated authority, his hand resting on his belt as he approached. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his tone firm but laced with condescension. "Can you tell me what you're doing here?" The woman stopped, her expression shifting from focus to mild annoyance. "I'm heading to a meeting," she replied evenly. "Is there a problem, officer?" The officer's eyes scanned her and then her car. "This vehicle, yours?" he asked, his question more accusation than inquiry. She straightened, her voice steady. "Yes, it is. Again, is there a problem?" The exchange caught the attention of passers-by, who slowed their steps, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding confrontation. The officer's demeanor grew more aggressive as he accused her of trespassing, suggesting her presence in the lot was unauthorized. When she attempted to clarify, he interrupted, raising his voice as if to assert dominance. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some ID," he demanded, gesturing toward her bag. Her patience wore thin. "And what exactly is the basis for this request?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with defiance. "I've done nothing wrong." "Refusal to cooperate can be grounds for further action," he snapped, his hand inching toward his cuffs. Onlookers began whispering, their discomfort palpable as they watched the officer escalate the situation. The woman, however, remained composed. She carefully retrieved her ID from her bag and handed it over, her movements deliberate. The officer barely glanced at the card before pocketing it. "Step to the side, ma'am," he ordered. "You're being detained for questioning." "For what?" she demanded, her voice firm but unwavering. "Suspicious activity," he replied vaguely, his grip tightening on the cuffs. As he placed the cuffs on her wrists, the weight of humiliation settled over her. The crowd grew larger, some recording the interaction, their phones raised as the scene spiraled. Unbeknownst to the officer, the woman's confidence hadn't wavered because she knew something he didn't. Beneath the blue suit and calm exterior was a formidable force, the state attorney general, the top lawyer in the state. Her position granted her authority over cases and decisions that could shape the lives of thousands, including officers like him. As the officer led her toward his car, the onlookers exchanged uneasy glances, their murmurs growing louder. The woman, despite the indignity of the situation, held her head high. The storm brewing around them was about to unleash a reckoning neither the officer nor the crowd could anticipate. The woman, a high-ranking state attorney, with a reputation for brilliance and integrity, had built her career on the foundation of hard work, resilience, and a deep commitment to justice. From a young age, she had been acutely aware of the inequities in the legal system, and this awareness fueled her ambition to become a force for change. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood, she had faced her share of challenges, some overt, others subtle. Yet every obstacle became a stepping stone, shaping her into the fearless advocate she was today. Her journey was marked by tireless dedication. From excelling in law school to becoming a top federal prosecutor, she earned her position not through privilege, but by outworking and outsmarting those who doubted her. Her career was filled with landmark cases where she fought for civil rights, challenging systemic injustices and holding powerful entities accountable. Known for her sharp mind and unyielding determination, she had gained the respect of her peers, the admiration of her community, and the fear of those who thrived on exploitation and discrimination. Outside of the courtroom, she was a mentor to young legal minds and an advocate for programs aimed at diversifying the legal profession. Despite her successes, she remained grounded, carrying a quiet humility that resonated with everyone who worked alongside her. For her, justice wasn't just a profession. It was a mission to ensure that the law worked for everyone, regardless of their background. The officer, on the other hand, painted a starkly contrasting picture. A veteran of the force, he had cultivated a reputation within the department that was troubling at best. While some saw him as a no-nonsense cop who got the job done, others knew the darker side of his tenure. Complaints of racial profiling, excessive force, and misconduct trailed him like a shadow, but none had ever led to meaningful consequences. Protected by a culture of leniency and a department hesitant to confront its own issues, he operated with impunity. He had a pattern, targeting individuals he perceived as vulnerable or out of place. To him, minorities in affluent areas were suspicious by default. This unchecked authority had emboldened him to act on prejudice, viewing his badge as a shield against accountability. He wielded power not as a tool to protect and serve, but as a weapon to assert control and perpetuate biases. The officer's actions were often justified with vague references to suspicious behavior or routine protocol, but beneath the surface lay a deep-seated prejudice that shaped his every decision. He believed he was untouchable, insulated by a system that rarely scrutinized those in uniform. That day, however, he had unknowingly targeted someone whose power and resolve far outweighed his assumptions, a decision that would soon unravel everything he thought he knew about control and consequence. The parking lot was bustling with activity, shoppers going about their day, when the officer spotted the well-dressed black woman stepping out of her car. She carried herself with confidence, her tailored blue suit and organized demeanor exuding professionalism. Yet, to the officer, none of that mattered. In his mind, her presence in this affluent area was reason enough for suspicion. He approached her briskly, barking, "Ma'am, whose car is this?" The woman, startled but composed, looked up and calmly replied, "It's mine." "Is there a problem?" The officer's eyes narrowed. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. I need to see some identification and proof that this is your vehicle." The woman opened her purse to retrieve her driver's license and registration, but the officer cut her off before she could hand them over. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone dripping with condescension. "This doesn't seem like your kind of neighborhood." Her brow furrowed at the thinly veiled insult, but she maintained her calm. "I just finished a meeting nearby," she said, holding out her documents. "Here's my ID and registration." The officer snatched the documents, barely glancing at them before accusing, "These could be fake. You need to step away from the vehicle." A small crowd began to gather, their murmurs growing louder as they watched the encounter unfold. Some took out their phones to record, sensing the injustice of the situation. "I've complied with your request, officer," the woman said firmly, though her tone remained respectful. "Now, unless you have a valid reason to detain me, I'd like to leave." But the officer wasn't interested in reason. "Step back," he barked, his hand moving to his handcuffs. "You're resisting." The woman raised her hands slightly, signaling she posed no threat, but the officer moved in swiftly, twisting her arms behind her back and snapping the cuffs on with unnecessary force. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she was marched to the patrol car. She didn't resist, her head held high despite the humiliation. "What exactly am I being arrested for?" she asked evenly. "For theft and trespassing," he said smugly, pushing her into the back seat. From inside the car, she looked directly at him. Her voice was calm, but carried a sharp edge. "My name is State Attorney's name," she said, locking eyes with the officer. "I'm the State Attorney and Chief Prosecutor for this district. I oversee cases like this every day. Now, tell me again what you think I've done." The officer froze, his smirk vanishing as her words sank in. He blinked, struggling to process what she had just said. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and a few people shouted in disbelief. "I suggest you reconsider your actions," she continued, "because I assure you, every word of this will be documented and reviewed." The officer's face flushed, but his arrogance wouldn't let him back down. "You think your title makes you untouchable?" he sneered, doubling down on his mistake. "We'll see about that." He slammed the door shut, pacing away to collect himself. By now, the crowd was buzzing with indignation, and several onlookers shouted their support for the woman. The recordings of the incident began circulating online, setting the stage for an explosive fallout. The officer smugly escorted the woman into the station, still oblivious to the tidal wave of consequences awaiting him. Sitting calmly in the holding area, the woman requested her phone call, a small but firm smile on her face. The officer scoffed but allowed her access, brushing off her request as routine. The call wasn't ordinary. She dialed directly to the state governor's office. Her voice was steady, but laced with quiet authority, as she explained the situation, detailing her wrongful arrest and the officer's belligerence. The person on the other end of the line was stunned, promising swift action. Within moments, the police chief himself was on another call to the precinct. Across the station, the officer sat in an office with his supervisor, boasting about his textbook arrest. The conversation was abruptly interrupted by a secretary entering nervously, whispering something into the supervisor's ear. The officer's smug demeanor began to falter as the supervisor's expression darkened. "Officer," the supervisor said curtly, "you're wanted in the conference room. Now." The officer entered the room to find his superior officers gathered, their faces tense. At the head of the table was the police chief, his voice cold and cutting as he began. "Explain yourself. Why is the state attorney of this district sitting in a holding cell? What justification do you have for detaining someone of her position without cause?" The officer stammered, trying to justify his actions. "She was acting suspiciously," he muttered. "You thought wrong," the chief snapped. "This isn't just an egregious error in judgment. It's misconduct, and from what I've learned, it's part of a troubling pattern." As the chief continued, detailing the numerous complaints of racial profiling and harassment in the officer's file, the officer's confidence crumbled. His history of misconduct, previously ignored or brushed aside, was now fully exposed. The state attorney's intervention had brought his unchecked behavior into the spotlight. Meanwhile, back in the holding area, the woman was freed and greeted by the police chief, who personally apologized for the ordeal. "This department owes you an explanation and immediate action," he said. She nodded, her composed expression not betraying the fire of determination within. The video captured by bystanders had already gone viral, flooding social media and news outlets with outrage. Calls for justice and accountability erupted, and the officer became the focal point of public condemnation. For the first time, the shield of impunity he had relied on was shattered. Justice moved swiftly as the weight of the incident unraveled. The officer, once confident in his unchecked authority, was immediately suspended pending a thorough investigation. The police department, facing mounting public outrage, issued a formal apology to the woman, acknowledging their failure to ensure fair treatment. But the woman, resilient and principled, was not content with a mere apology. She recognized that her case represented something far larger, a systemic issue that required deep and lasting change. Using her legal expertise and public platform, she launched a formal case against the department, not for personal gain, but to demand tangible reforms. Her lawsuit called for mandatory racial bias training, improved protocols for handling arrests, and accountability measures for officers with histories of misconduct. The incident quickly became a focal point for discussions about policing reform. Advocacy groups rallied around her, leveraging the virality of the video to draw attention to similar cases of racial profiling and abuse of power. Local and state officials, pressured by the wave of public scrutiny, pledged to address long-standing issues within law enforcement. In a bold move, the woman organized a press conference, standing tall and composed as cameras flashed and reporters fired questions. Her voice was steady as she recounted the events, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as an advocate demanding change. "This isn't just about me," she began, her words carrying the weight of her experience and her vision for the future. "What happened to me is something that happens far too often to those without the means or platform to fight back. This is about creating a system where justice isn't determined by the color of your skin." Her message resonated deeply, inspiring individuals and communities across the state. Activists began organizing town halls and public forums, where citizens shared their own encounters with injustice and proposed solutions. The momentum grew, transforming what began as an isolated incident into a movement for meaningful change. Behind the scenes, the woman worked tirelessly with lawmakers and civil rights organizations to draft legislation aimed at combating racial profiling and increasing transparency in law enforcement. The proposed reforms included a database to track officers with repeated complaints, stricter guidelines for body camera usage, and funding for community policing initiatives designed to rebuild trust between officers and the public. Meanwhile, the officer faced the consequences of his actions. The investigation revealed a troubling pattern of racial bias, leading to his dismissal from the force. His case became a cautionary tale, underscoring the necessity of the reforms being championed. The woman's advocacy extended beyond the courtroom and legislative chambers. She partnered with community organizations to create educational programs that taught citizens their legal rights and how to handle interactions with law enforcement. Her efforts empowered individuals to stand up against injustice, ensuring they wouldn't feel powerless in the face of discrimination. Her determination inspired a ripple effect. Departments across the state began voluntarily adopting the proposed reforms, recognizing the need to rebuild trust with the communities they served. Officers who once operated without accountability now faced stricter oversight, while community leaders and residents played active roles in shaping new policies. By refusing to accept a simple apology, the woman had ignited a movement. Her courage and resolve had turned a personal injustice into a beacon of hope and change, proving that one act of defiance could alter the course of an entire system. The journey wasn't over, but progress was undeniable. She had not only reclaimed her dignity, but had also paved the way for a more just and equitable future. The aftermath of the incident marked a profound shift in the local law enforcement system and the broader community. The officer, who had epitomized unchecked authority and bias, faced the consequences of his actions. The investigation revealed a history of misconduct, leading to his termination from the force. His dismissal sent a clear message. Such behavior would no longer be tolerated, and accountability was no longer optional. The police department, under mounting public and legal pressure, began implementing sweeping reforms. Diversity training became mandatory, designed to address implicit biases and educate officers on how to interact respectfully with all citizens. De-escalation protocols were revamped, emphasizing nonviolent conflict resolution techniques. A newly formed oversight committee, inclusive of community leaders and civil rights advocates, was tasked with monitoring officer behavior and ensuring transparency in all proceedings. For the woman, the incident was both a personal and professional turning point. Already a formidable state lawyer, she embraced her new role as a public advocate for systemic reform. Her experiences fueled her passion for justice, and she took on a growing number of cases involving police misconduct, ensuring that others who faced discrimination could find a voice and an ally. Her advocacy extended beyond the courtroom. Partnering with grassroots organizations, she launched public education campaigns aimed at empowering citizens to know their rights and navigate encounters with law enforcement. Town hall meetings became a staple of her outreach, where she listened to stories from marginalized communities and worked collaboratively to address their concerns. Her work began to resonate far beyond her state. Media coverage of her case and her subsequent efforts inspired a national conversation about racial profiling and police reform. Invitations to speak at conferences and panels poured in, and her story became a symbol of resilience and the power of accountability. The ripple effects were undeniable. Departments across the country began adopting the reforms championed by her efforts, recognizing the need to rebuild trust with their communities. Lawmakers at both state and federal levels proposed legislation inspired by her advocacy, focusing on increasing transparency, improving officer training, and creating systems to hold law enforcement accountable. The woman's personal life also evolved. She became a mentor to young lawyers and activists, sharing her journey and encouraging them to pursue careers dedicated to justice. Her experiences, while harrowing, had ignited a sense of purpose that extended far beyond her own professional achievements. The final scene captures the culmination of her efforts. Standing at a podium during a public event, she is surrounded by individuals whose lives she has touched, families of victims, fellow advocates, and community leaders. The crowd erupts in applause as she is presented with an award for her contributions to justice and reform. Her speech is a reflection of her journey, equal parts gratitude and determination. "We must remember," she says, her voice steady and clear, "that justice isn't just about what happens in the courtroom. It's about ensuring that power is wielded responsibly, that every voice is heard, and that every life is valued. True justice is about accountability." Her words resonate deeply, leaving a lasting impact on the audience. Among the crowd is a young woman inspired by her story, ready to follow in her footsteps and take up the mantle of advocacy. As the event concludes, the woman walks away from the stage, greeted by colleagues and supporters. The scene shifts to her office, where she works tirelessly on her next case, a testament to her unwavering commitment to change. Her journey had begun with an act of prejudice, but it had culminated in a legacy of progress. Her resilience had transformed a moment of injustice into a movement, proving that true justice isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about holding those in power accountable, ensuring that the system works for everyone, not just the privileged few. The story closes with her standing at her desk, gazing at a framed quote on her wall that reads, "Courage is contagious, and every step toward justice inspires another."